Hey y'all, editing Marquita here. Please excuse the lighting. This is just a quick note about what you're going to see in some parts of the book review. At the end, I do talk about one of the subjects, which is eugenics that occurs throughout the book. And I also talk about some of the history of eugenics in North Carolina, with the forced sterilization of women in North Carolina. And I also talk about some sponsors, or I guess you could say entities that allowed that or contributed to that project actually happening and continuing. If you're not interested in that, I do have a little note up that kind of talks about where I start going into the little history moment about that, and then revert back to the ending of the video. So if you don't care too much about that history part, you just don't want to watch it at that point, you can always skip, and I'll have the time up on the message. And also, I will put a couple of links down below just to get you started on looking at information about what I'm speaking on. But I definitely highly advise you to do your own research on the topic. But again, the links that I will list with the articles below will give you just a little bit of background specific to the North Carolina forced sterilization situations that happened between 1929 and I want to say 1974. So that was all occurring, and it also overlaps with what's going on in the book. So just want to give you a little heads up. And again, it is not calling or blaming anything or anybody for that time frame, because again, you'll see me talk about good intentions and how you have to think about the time frame in which these things were going on and the mindset of people during that time frame. So while there are things that were not right and that we could say are unforgivable, we also need to be reminded how these things happen, also so that we can make sure that they don't happen in the future as we continue to watch what's going on politically about women's rights when it comes to their bodies and choices. Hello, y'all, and welcome back to the channel. Marquita here with another book review. So today I'm going to be reviewing Take My Hand by Dolan Perkins Valdez. This, as you can see, was another Target Book Club selection. It is also a signed copy. You guys know I love my signed copy books here. And boy, am I glad that I picked this one up. This is a great book. I read the summary on the back and it sounded like something interesting, but it was way better than I could have imagined. And it brought about a lot of thoughts provoking things, especially as a woman. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys kind of a summary and an overview, and then I'm going to give you some of my thoughts and opinions and kind of talk about how this book ties into current day situations, which is also kind of scary, but also kind of good, because again, that's that thought provoking piece that we like when we read. So in this book, we are in between kind of like present day, which is in this book 2016 is present day, and then back in time in 1973 in Montgomery, Alabama. So at the time of in the Montgomery time, or maybe I should rewind. So our main character is Sybil Townsend. She is a nurse at the Montgomery Family Planning Clinic. That is her first job out of college. She comes from a pretty, I guess you would say, middle class, upper middle class family. Her dad's a doctor in town, has his own practice, and her mom is she's a bit of an artist, but she's also like a struggling, not a struggling artist, but she's an artist. She's talented, but she's also kind of like an absent mother, because she has, and again, this is in the 70s, so think back into the time, she would probably be what we would diagnose as either maybe manic depressive. It would probably fall into depression, because she is still there. She functions like independently, but she, like I said, she is an artist. She's talented. She goes out into this shed that they have on their property, and she paints, and she just spends hours, like all day, sometimes days, sleeps in there in the shed, and she's just painting. And even when Sybil is talking to her, or trying to interact with her, like she does talk to her, she speaks, but it's almost like Sybil's just kind of an afterthought. She was never a mother to Sybil. Like, she didn't have a typical upbringing where you have a mom and a dad. Even though the mom exists in the household, she just wasn't that nurturer. So she kind of grew up under her dad's care. And again, her dad's a doctor, and she went on to follow in the medical footsteps of going to nursing school. And like most people that go into any kind of service field, your main mission is to either give back to the community or, help people in some way. And so for her, she was kind of doing both of those things. She was giving back to her community because she was working at this family planning clinic that was government funded, and it was helping poor and underprivileged women. And so her job as a nurse was to basically administer birth control shots to her patients. The Depo-Provera shot had recently come out, and that's what they were kind of pushing at the time. Birth control pills were still available, but we all know with the birth control pill, one of the biggest flaws is that people can forget to take it. And so imagine like maybe a woman who is trying to run a household, got 2 or 3 kids running around and just trying to keep life together. Like she may or may not remember to take that pill. However, with the shot, if you're not familiar, and this is how it works present day, you take the shot and it's a one-time thing for, once a month, or I think it's every 3 months. I don't know. I never took the shot because weight gain is one of the side effects that a lot of people experience because it has water retention, and so that was not appealing to me. So I never took that. But at the end of the day, it's not something that you have to take daily. And so that's what made it convenient. And then we're also talking about, again, the people who live in poverty, essentially. And this is the Deep South. This is Montgomery, Alabama in 1973. People is poor. Okay, especially people of color. And that's primarily who this clinic is servicing. It's not strictly for people of color, but that is the primary demographic that is being serviced by the clinic. And again, it's federally funded, so they receive funds to be able to provide the health care, to be able to provide the birth control and all of those things to the women in that area. So each nurse is given, like a caseload. And so that was her first caseload consisted of these 2 girls named Erica and India, and they're sisters. And her task is really just to go give them their shot. And so in some cases, the people come to the clinic. In other cases, the nurses would go to their house. So in this case, Civil would go to the house of India and Erica. So the first time that she goes to the house, she is very taken aback by the conditions of their whole situation. Again, like I said, she came from a relatively probably middle to upper class household because her dad's a doctor and he has his own practice. So she's lived a very good and probably in some ways sheltered life. Like she's aware of things that go on, especially again being in the South, being black in the South in the 70s. She understands those types of things. But it's one thing to know that people are poor, but it's a whole nother thing to actually see what that looks like sometimes. Especially, we're not just talking like, oh, they can't, they have to work 2 jobs to try and make ends meet. We're talking about you ain't got running water, you have an outhouse, your floor is see-through, or your roof gets some sunlight coming in. You have a unofficial sunroom because your roof is missing some pieces. Like that kind of living poor. Like there's poor and then there's po. These people would be what we consider po. Also, what she finds out is that the mother of these girls has passed away due to cancer. So for the most part, they were raised by their father, who is also illiterate and, needless to say, uneducated, illiterate. And then they have the grandmother, who probably, I would say I don't think she's literate either, but I think she might be a little bit better off than the dad. And so either way, you have these 2 people who really aren't that educated on, life in general, but they know how to make things happen. The dad works for this white man as kind of like a farmhand slash handyman, whatever, and they live behind the white man's house in what will basically be like a shanty or a shack. So very, very, very poor, really not living conditions. Like it wouldn't be something that people should be living in, period. And it's like out on a farm. So when she goes to their house to administer the shots, one, she has to take in all of that. She's not used to seeing people living like that because that's just not where she came from. And she comes from this where it's like a community. And so imagine living in like, a suburb or a neighborhood where everybody's kind of on the same level in terms of, everybody has a house, they have a car, all of the education, all of those things. And then now you're out here where these people have the complete opposite situation. So she has to adjust to that, but she falls in love and becomes attached to the girls and the whole family very quickly. And one thing that she realizes when she's going to give the shot is one of the girls tells her, like, my sister, the younger sister, India, hasn't even started bleeding yet. And what she's talking about is her period. And what she's saying is that her younger sister hasn't even started her period, yet she is already on birth control. And so that was kind of like the first red flag for Civil, is that one, she was kind of alarmed or confused as to why they were on birth control anyway, given their ages, because they were both under preteens. And the fact that one of them hadn't even started her cycle yet was also kind of alarming to Civil, because why would you have a girl on birth control that doesn't even have a period? Like, she can't get pregnant, by nature. She can't get pregnant. So why is she already on birth control? And so that was the first red flag. And so the sisters, again, with the poor conditions, they weren't even in school, so they were starting on a journey of being illiterate. They weren't well cared for in the terms of upkeep. Like, of course, they were fed, they had clothes, but the hair was matted, it wasn't taken care of. It doesn't seem like they have been washing and bathing daily. But again, that was based on what they had. So that was kind of the situation. So Sybil kind of takes a motherly role with these girls and becomes very attached to them, because she's just like, I can't, as a person, you can't just look at a person in that situation. You automatically want to help them. But one thing that Sybil learns is that good intentions can sometimes have consequences, although they can be good or bad. And so all of the good intentions that Sybil goes in, and that's kind of like a theme of the book, like the whole idea of this family clinic, which, it doesn't cost the patients anything to get the services that they get from the clinic. That's a good intention, to be able to provide birth control to women who probably couldn't get it otherwise, and probably who desperately need it more than anybody, because they really can't afford to have unplanned pregnancies. So again, good intentions. Um, Giving them access to healthcare as a woman, good intentions. So the location of the clinic being, in this area, which is typically underserved, for that population, good intentions. The birth control access, good intentions. Um, but what Civil starts to realize is that, again, the good intentions aren't always so good. And even her desire to help her family, the family that she is the case manager for the two girls and their family, even her desire to help them, she realizes that at some point she's overstepping, and that although everything she's doing for them is really truly out of, again, good intentions and just her love for them, because she, again, really does develop a bond and a love for the family, it's still intrusive and sometimes insulting. Not purposefully, but it can be insulting when you, and the grandmother and the father kind of respectfully remind her of that. Sometimes it's kind of like, you come from one world, we're from two different worlds. We understand what you're trying to do and we're very grateful, but at some point, like, it's too much. Like, we appreciate your help, we appreciate you getting us some of the resources that she's able to help them get, but at some point you got to back up and let us kind of live. And so that's when she starts to reflect and say, okay, I know I'm overstepping, but she just can't help herself, because she wants to make things better for them, and she wants the girls to have better, especially. Like, I think the two girls is what really um keeps her, gravitated to that family, because she doesn't, and I think the fact that she didn't have her mother to kind of give her that motherly love, she's always longed for that. And the fact that she can kind of be that for the girls, that ties into her, working with them the way she does and doing for them the way that she does. And one of the things that we also see is that Sybil becomes so attached to this family and to these girls and their plight and what happens to them, that it causes her to make a very life-altering decision in terms of how she lives her life, the rest of her life, and most of her life. One of the things that I didn't mention in the beginning is that Sybil is telling this story. So this is all from her perspective. So you see a lot of first person, but also she's telling this story. When the book first opens, we're in present day 2016. She's telling her story to her daughter. Her daughter's name is Anne. Anne has just finished college. She's now 23, I believe. She just graduated college. So it's kind of like where this story starts is where Anne's is right now in her life. And so I think that's the relevance there. And also, Sybil has just retired from her medical career. So she's like, hey, like, I'm coming out. You're about to get started in life. You're right where I was when all this took place. So now let me tell you how we got to where we are in terms of, her daughter Anne and her story. And then she's also just telling her about some of the decisions that she's made in her life and how those girls, her patients, played into those life decisions. So that is what we see in the book. It's a really good book. It has so many things that are relevant to today when it comes to women's rights, birth control, just choices about our bodies. There are so many things that are relevant now that were mentioned in the book. And one other thing to note about this book is that it was based off of, or loosely based off of, a real case that occurred, and the situation that happens in the book actually occurred to the girls as well. So I'll go ahead and read you the name of that case. This case was called Ralph versus Weinberger, and it did happen in Montgomery, Alabama in 1973. So I'll let you go ahead and look that up and you can see what happened. But the book plays out based on what similar to what happened in that trial, the reason for that case to come about. This case did end up going into court in DC, and it was kind of a groundbreaking situation when it came down to some rights concerning these issues. So looking at that and thinking about that, it also goes back to things like sterilization. So just a quick little tidbit on sterilization. If you're not familiar with forced sterilization of women, I would highly advise you to get to Googling, because there's so much out there about that is not really publicized. It's not hidden, but it's also not like publicized. Like, a lot of people know about Roe versus Wade. Like, that's, if somebody mentions that case, like, we know what it is, we know what happened. But there's so many things that happen beyond that when it comes to women's rights and women's bodies. So I think, especially now with all of the focus on that right now in society and politically, we need to really know what's going on and what the history is when it comes to women's rights. And so this book is a good kind of awareness bringer. If you weren't familiar with some of these issues, you should start looking into them. But again, looking at forced sterilization of women, you can do in the USA, you can do in North Carolina, and I'm going to speak on that in just a moment. But there have been times throughout history where women were forcibly sterilized, meaning that they were not given informed consent. So they did not know that they were agreeing to have a procedure that would prevent them from having children permanently. They were either told that they either weren't told, or they were told that the procedure would be reversible, meaning that if they did decide they wanted children later on, or more children if they already had some, that they could have the surgery reversed, which is not true. So also, this brings up the issue of, or before I go into that, another note on first forced sterilization of women. When I was in college, I did a research paper on the first forced sterilization of women in North Carolina. For those who are new here, hi, and I'm originally from North Carolina, currently residing in Virginia. But because I was from North Carolina, I did the research on forced sterilization of women in North Carolina. And unfortunately, there's lots of information there. And there was a time when women were forcibly sterilized because they were deemed unfit for some reason. It could have been because of their mental IQ. So, if you have an IQ below 70, then you're not considered, to be average mental functioning. So, women who fit in that category, women who were poor, or both, And a lot of times it was women of color or women that had a lot of children already. So all of these women were forcibly sterilized. So look into that, dig into that, because there's a lot to it. I did a whole paper on it, but dig into that. And one thing I do want to point out, some significant key points about that those situations in North Carolina were funded privately by companies and schools. By schools, I mean college, university, that we know that are still around and that we still support. Wake Forest University was a funding agent. Um, Procter and Gamble, also known as P&G. If you have Tide, if you have um, Crest, if you have Scope, Bounty, all of those things that fall under way more, pretty much every kind of household thing that most people use, P&G products, Procter and Gamble. Those were two entities that kind of shocked me. Well, Procter and Gamble I wouldn't say shocked me as much, but Wake Forest being involved in that. But in the defense, this goes back to the theme of good intentions. The board for this, for the forced sterilizations, for these projects or whatever, I forgot what they actually called that situation that was going on, but the board, they had a board that was overseeing these things, and of course they were getting places like Procter and Gamble and Wake Forest, and there were other places. They were not the only two, so I don't want to just put that out there like they were the only ones contributing to that. But those are two that stuck out to me because I'm familiar with both of those, and given their major entities, especially Procter and Gamble, but knowing that they contribute to that, but then realizing why they contribute to that, again going back to good intentions, because this was presented to them as we're helping these people because this will allow them to not end up in a, keep them from getting in a situation that might be a bad situation. So in their defense, again, they thought they were doing something good. They thought they were contributing funding for something that would be beneficial. At least we want to believe that. I'm going to say that they had all good intentions because there may be some people who knew exactly what was going on, but I seriously doubt it in those boards, like in Procter and Gamble and Wake Forest. They may honestly have not known what was really going on or the situation, but it was presented to them in the way of saying that you are contributing to something that will be beneficial to society. Now, this can also go back, and let me put on my little psychology cap and start talking about genetics. We'll be here all night. But what I really want to talk about also is talking about genetics and how we control society and what desirable type of demographics and people and all of that. It goes back to that as well, because when I mentioned limiting the ability for women who may have been considered mentally unfit based on their IQs and whatnot, that goes back to a control factor in terms of we don't want to keep reproducing or producing more people like that. So that's where, even though you go with the good intentions, it's kind of like the morality and choice. Because everybody that has a lower IQ, below, what would be considered an average IQ, is not incapable of doing things like caring for themselves or even a child. They may not be able to answer algebra 2 problems or even read at a collegiate level, but it doesn't mean they can't do basic daily functions. There are a lot of people who are, and I'm speaking as a former special education teacher who has, and school psychology partial major, who has given assessments that test IQ, that test abilities. And I also trained students who had extreme cognitive disabilities and also children who were right there on the border or slightly below what would be considered like average IQ. And I can tell you that a lot of them are still able to function and do basic functions. I actually know people who fall in that category that have children and they're able to care for themselves and the child, without assistance in terms of being able to know what to do. Like, you can teach them what to do and they can do it. And so once they're taught what to do, they can become independent. So that thought process of, because somebody is not at a certain IQ level, that they can't care or they shouldn't have children, because of that, because we don't want to take the risk of them having another child like them, that's where you start to question some things about good intentions. Because what you're trying to do is produce a certain type of society. What people wanted to do, and that is eugenics would be the term. Um, like I said, former psychology major, studied all of these things. They're very interesting. Google it all. But that's what you're doing. You're trying to control the type of people that we're producing in society. So we want a desired type of person. We want people who are intelligent, highly intelligent, really, and people, in some cases, certain demographics of people. But the idea or the thought process behind all of this is essentially, we want to make sure that we don't produce these undesirables for whatever reason they're undesirable, whether it be mentally, racially, uh, income levels, whatever. Because if they're in poverty and they have children in poverty, chances are they're still going to be in poverty. So we don't want to keep reproducing people, impoverished people either. We don't want to keep reproducing people who are not mentally fit, that type of thing. So we want to create a certain type of society where everybody's kind of at least this level and above type situation. And so that's what's kind of going on in a lot of these cases, and what you will see throughout the book. And as you start looking into cases, if you start doing your research, you'll see that a lot of times when forced sterilization is involved, it has to do with eugenics and trying to dictate the type of people that are born into society, or that we continue to allow to reproduce. So that's why I said do your research on women's rights, because it's not just about abortion. That is just the tip of the iceberg. That iceberg is deep, deep, deep down in the water, and you should keep digging, because it's really important to be educated on these issues, no matter where you stand on that particular topic. If you educate yourself on the other pieces of that puzzle, then I think you will get a fuller understanding of what it truly means when you vote to revert back to some of the things that were in place that we have since moved forward from. There's a reason why we move forward. So I think you'll understand that a little bit better if you start to do your research on just women's rights and forced sterilization. Look up forced sterilization in America. You can look up forced sterilization in North Carolina, forced sterilization of women. All of those topics, just get to digging. And in the top it all off, you can look up eugenics as well, just to get an understanding of what that is and what that means, and how women's rights, in terms of what it has to do with their bodies, how that plays into that. But enough of that little lesson. Back to this book. Like I said, I would highly recommend this book if you're interested in like history, or things that are relevant to current events, or how history kind of influences a book. This will be a good book to read. If you're a woman, you may like this, especially if you want to learn a little bit more about how things were back in the day, and how that can contribute to other things, and how these pivotal cases that are coming about and have come about when it comes to women's rights, how what has happened, some of the things that have happened to create that. And the last thing I want to note is, when it comes into medicine in general in the Black community, and like medical research, especially Tuskegee. Again, this is down in Alabama. At the time of this story, or in the setting of 1973, the Tuskegee experiment had just been exposed. Like, things had just came out about that. So people were still reeling from that shock that occurred, and they're wondering, like, how did that happen, one, at all, and then for so long, because it was 4 decades, not 4 FOR, but 4 as in 1, 2, 3, 4 decades of that. And so people were so shocked that this happened, as we would say, in plain sight. And so if you don't know what Tuskegee experiment is, Look that up too. But in short, it deals with giving black men were given injected with syphilis, the syphilis disease, virus or whatnot, and they were not treated. They were injected with it to see how it affects their bodies. So essentially, they were suffering with syphilis, even though there was a cure or treatment for it. But it was done so that the scientists could see how it affects their bodies. They also did not have informed consent. That is where informed consent comes from. So y'all getting a whole lot of lessons up in here, and I bet you didn't know I knew all that stuff. But informed consent comes from that as well, and all that simply means is that basically you know what is going to happen to your blood, your samples, your tissues, your whatever when you go to the doctor and they do any kind of medical procedure. You're signing off that you agree to do whatever, whatever, whatever. And they're basically saying, we told you that we're going to do all these things with the blood we take, with the samples we take, whatever the case may be. So that is informed consent. Also telling you like the risk of, any procedures or whatever you might have going on too. So that's informed consent, making sure that you know all the information you need to know about whatever it is that you're about to have done and what happens with whatever things are taken, drawn, sampled, examined, whatever. And so that is informed consent. And Tuskegee experiment is the reason why you have that. So when you sign all those papers, think about that. But either way, recommend that book, Take My Hand by Dolan Perkins Valdez. Let me know if you guys have read this book or if you read any book from this author, and let me know your thoughts. And even if you haven't read it, let me know your thoughts about what I have just shared with you. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Please be sure to like and subscribe.